Well, our guest today is Senior Officer Jesse Guardiola with the Tulsa Police Department. Welcome, old friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again.
You as well. You as
Man,
well.
since you and I talked last, you've been rubbing elbows with some high folk on the totem pole. In fact, you got an award recently, did you not?
The Attorney General's Distinguished Medal for Service in Community Policing. It was about 6 months or so ago, I got a call from Department of Justice saying that they really would like to see the kind of things we're doing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so I submitted some research, not knowing that this was actually going to go down the path of an award. And they called me back and they said, we'd like to do some interviews with you, and went from, by the way, Jesse, there are 700 agencies who are vying for this medal in community policing. We think you're a strong candidate to make into the finals, which I thought was fantastic. So it went down from 500 to 250 agencies, down to, when it got to 25, they said, we would like for the FBI to get involved and vet some more of that research of yours, and to vet you as well. And I said, this is great, and that we're going down this path, and this is bringing good light to what we're doing here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I did not know that we would actually pull it off, and sure enough, I get a call from one of the directors of the Department of Justice that says that you won the Attorney General's Distinguished Medal for Service in the outreach efforts that you are doing there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So they sent myself, Chief Jordan, and my wife to Washington, D.C. to receive the medal from Attorney General William Barr.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's well deserved.
Thank you, Sam.
Some of the things we're going to talk about today are less happy than that. And I want to start with the fear factor. As I said earlier, there are folk who live in our town with fear 24/7. Can you help the folks at home understand who we're talking about?
Well, I best illustrate this with the story. This was recently a family that was in Midtown Tulsa. It was Lewis and Admiral. And these two fathers were sitting outside visiting. Their children were inside the home. And a black vehicle drives up. Person gets out of the vehicle, walks up, and puts a gun to their faces and says, "Give me the money that is in your wallet." So they hand over the money, and the person in that vehicle drives away. Well, inside the home through the window, their teenage boys are watching this whole thing unveil. So the teenage boys come outside and tell their fathers, let us call it in. We speak English, we can communicate, we're first-generation American kids. And the fathers told their children, no, we're not going to call this in. And the children are asking, well, why not? I mean, we know what he looked like, we know what kind of car he's driving, we got partial license plates. And the father said, because we're more afraid of what the response in law enforcement will be, and whether they will be favorable towards their immigration status. So that shows one side of what's going on in the Hispanic immigrant community.
Were they illegals?
The fathers were. But what ends up happening is that vehicle drives off, and that same robbery suspect ends up robbing a family at 96th and Riverside, robs a family at 41st and Yale, and robs another family at Broken Arrow.
All Hispanic?
No, sir. These were non-Hispanic families that were being robbed. And I use that story to illustrate to our Oklahoma, Tulsa residents that when crime goes unreported like this, we could have stopped this person, presumably at the very beginning, with a good description by the kids and also the fathers, but they chose not to get involved. And therefore it affects the rest of us in the city, because these criminals know that they can go unchecked in our city until multiple families unfortunately had to be victimized, because the Hispanic immigrant community, and not just the immigrant community, but the first generation American kids who are being conditioned by family members to not get involved in the legal system because of fear misinformation, but these kids are being raised in a way that police are not to be trusted, either by conditioning from the country they came from or because of some, again, misinformation or something that somebody may be telling them that is not true.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't there some youngsters out there who intentionally stop short of a great performance on the field of play, football, basketball, soccer, or intentionally back off of when they've got a shot at an A, they'll settle for a B, simply because they don't want to draw attention to themselves?
Well, in some cases, we have seen where families won't fill out financial aid forms for U.S. citizen children, even with family members that have legal status in the United States, but for fear of misinformation rocking the boat, so they don't apply to get financial aid for their kids. Or even WIC for some of these kids that are socioeconomically challenged, because they're afraid that somehow the perceived animal out there that's going to come show up and pick them up because now they've come out of hiding and put them into some sort of deportation process. Most of the time, it is just they're listening to people that don't have all the information, and they just choose to believe their neighbor over actually calling and asking questions about how their status will affect their children, or how they can better help their socioeconomically situation, feeding their families and so forth. But they can help their family, and because they don't call and ask, they just rely on their neighbor, their immigrant neighbor, their misinformation neighbor, and therefore children go unfed or unclothed or uneducated.
That's heartbreaking. That's absolutely heartbreaking.
Unfortunately, it exists.
What happens if overnight somebody comes along and picks up illegals here, illegals there? What happens to the town?
Well, it's an economic factor. So the low-skilled wages typically is the immigrant labor force, whether it be construction, lawn care, restaurant businesses. So chambers of commerce have long fought against this because they know that how it will impact a city, especially an urban city like Tulsa or Oklahoma City, because jobs that many of our youth, many of our Americans, including myself, don't want to bus tables, aren't in the business of lawn care, and they would rather pay somebody at a lower rate to come and do these jobs that they don't necessarily want to do or don't have the time to do. But when people are taken out of that economic wheel, well, then who's going to do that work?
Same thing for farmers.
Absolutely. The agricultural industry, pig farmers, hog farmers, chicken farmers, they will lose that low-skilled employee that is needed to keep wages and food prices lower because they can afford to work under these conditions.
I'm not going to draw you into a harsh political discussion. So he's too much of a gentleman. I'm not. Let me just say this problem could have been resolved many years ago if this country had stepped up and worked out some sort of serious immigration problem. Believe me, a lot more could have been done. When we come back, I want to talk with you a little bit about the community's acceptance of folk who come here from, if you will, south of the border, and what you find when you talk to the folk who are here living in fear. We're going to take a short break. We'll have more from this senior officer right after this.